Okay, so in the last lecture, we stopped at this point, and then we said, okay, now we will look at a few hyperparameters that are required to be defined so as to completely uh, implement a convolution operator. So these hyperparameters are these, right? So we have a number of input and output channels. We have kernel size, padding, and strides. So let's look at them one by one. So number of output channels is basically the number of independent convolution kernels that we apply to the input. So far we have always been looking at the case where we had just one convolution operator. So we had an input which was one channel, and then we applied one convolution kernel to it, and we ended up getting one output at the end. But typically what we do is we apply not one, but several convolution kernels here like this. So all these are independent from each other, and they are each applied to the input image. So the input image is convolved separately with each of these kernels, and we end up getting a certain number of output channels, right? So when we define a convolutional layer, we must say, okay, what is the number of output channels that I desire? Okay, and the thing to note here is that once we have these different kind of outputs, then these outputs together form the new representation of the image. And now whatever further processing is going to take place is going to be based on these representations. Okay. The other thing that we should look at is number of input channels. So far we have always seen the case where we had the input image, which was just one channel. But for example, if we have RGB images, then the input image is three channels. Or if we have uh, multimodal medical images, so if we have a MR and a CT image, and we are trying to make some diagnosis based on both of these images together, then we will have, for example, two channels in the input. Or in the general case, we can have some n number of input channels. Also, if we look at a certain hidden layer in the network, then we will have some generic number of input channels and some generic number of output channels. So basically, the point is that we should also understand how to apply the convolution operation when we have more than one input channels. And the point to note here is that whenever we have more than one input channel, the depth of the convolutional kernel will always be the same as the number of input channels. So the spatial extent of the kernel is usually 3 by 3 or 5 by 5. But for example, here if we have two input channels, the depth of the kernel will also be 2. And this is important so that we can then superimpose the kernel like this on the top left of the image across all channels, and then compute the dot product, which now consists of three sums. So sum across x, across y, but also across z. And then we end up getting one number which goes and sits here. And then same as before, we can shift the convolution kernel to the right and compute the dot product again. And we can keep doing this, and once we reach the rightmost corner of the image, we can come down, and basically the whole operation continues as before. So now we understand the number of input and output channels. The next thing to look at is kernel size. This is basically, well, the size of the convolutional kernel. So far we have been looking at 3 by 3 kernels, but it's also possible to have 5 by 5 kernels. And usually we don't go beyond this, but in theory we could. And the other thing is that we always look at the square kernels, but actually in fact it's also possible to have, for example, 4 by 3 kernels or something, although in practice it doesn't turn out to be used widely, but according to the definition of the operation itself, that's possible. Okay, so once we have defined the number of input channels, the kernel size, and the number of output channels, then basically we have the size of the whole convolution matrix. So we have n out, independent convolutional kernels, each of which is of size nn times k1 times k2. So you notice that when the number of input channels is nn, each of the convolutional kernels has also the same number in its depth dimension, right? And therefore, the weight matrix corresponding to the total convolutional layer is this guy, is of size this, right? So this corresponds to the number of tunable parameters in the convolutional layer. Okay, apart from the biases, so this is just of the number of tunable parameters in the convolution part of the convolutional layer. Let's say it like this. Okay, then we have padding. Okay, so this is basically, so you remember how we talked about the output size being smaller than the input size. This was because we could not apply the convolution operation at the boundary pixels, right? Because then what was happening is if we tried to center this kernel around this pixel, then we get the kernel like this, and then it goes outside the image, and now we cannot take the dot product anymore, right? So therefore we get this reduction in the size, and this reduction in size basically corresponds to the size of the kernel. So if the input size is ml times nl and the kernel size is kx times ky, then the output size gets reduced by this amount. So you can see that if you have larger kernels, so for example, if you have a 5 by 5 kernel, you would not be able to place the kernel even here, because even if it was 5 by 5, you would still have this guy going out. So then you would have to go one more inside. So you can see that so you can see basically the reduction is going to depend on the kernel size. Okay, a way to avoid this reduction in size is to basically ensure that we are able to place the convolutional kernel on all pixels of the input image. And this is done by simply padding some numbers on the like outside the boundaries of the image. And these paddings are usually done with zeros, or sometimes it's also possible to just copy the last row or column one more time and have that as the new boundary. Okay, and now when this is done, we can place the kernel on all pixels of the input image, and therefore we get an output which is of the same size as the input, and therefore this is referred to as same padding. I mean, this is really just padding. And the earlier one is called as valid convolution or no padding, and this is valid convolution because we just compute convolution where convolution is defined, right? So that's about padding. And then finally we have strides. Strides basically refers to the step size that we take while moving the kernel across the image. So here the kernel is centered on this pixel, and then in the next step it's centered on the next pixel. So here we have a stride of 1. This is the case that we have been looking at so far. But for example, it's also possible to have a stride of 2. Now in this case, the kernel was centered here, and then we skipped centering on this guy and we directly centered on the 4th pixel. Okay, so you can imagine that this would lead to a higher reduction in the output size as compared to the input size, because we won't have the output pixel corresponding to taking the dot product after centering this pixel, right? So yeah, so when stride is greater than 1, it leads to a reduction in the size of the output as compared to the input. So now we can see again, so if stride was 1 and we had valid convolutions, that is we did not do any padding, then just because of having to discard the boundary pixels, we had this reduction in the output size, right? Now if on top of that, if we use strides of greater than 1, we are going to have a further reduction in the output size, which is going to be given by this formula. So you can see that even if we use stride of 2, we already get an output size which is going to be almost half of that of the input size. So this can be pretty drastic reduction in the size of the input by using higher strides. Okay, so this is just a small question here to, just to try and see if we have understood these concepts clearly or not. So let's say we want to define a convolutional layer such that the input size and the output size should be the same. Then should we do padding or should we not do padding? And what should be the stride value for this convolutional layer? Right? So you can think about this a bit, but if you like, you can pause the video here and you can think about it. But basically, the answer is um, you if you want to get the same size, then you should do padding. If you keep only valid convolutions, then you will end up getting a reduction in the size of the output. And as far as the stride value is concerned, you should use a stride of 1. If you use a stride of higher than 1, then you will again get a reduction in the output size. Okay, so with these, now we have kind of fairly exhaustively discussed convolutional layers. And now what we can do is we can move to the next kind of important part of the puzzle. So pooling layers. So what is pooling? Pooling is basically exactly what the name suggests. Pooling is an operation that enables pooling information in a neighborhood or aggregating information from a neighborhood. So this is applied to each channel independently. So let's say this guy is the output of a convolution operator, right? So this is one output channel. And now what we can do is we can look at this region of this channel and then look at these 4 pixels and somehow aggregate the information from all those 4 pixels down to one number. And then we can move this black box here. So now we have these 4 pixels, and then we can again aggregate the information of these 4 numbers on down to this number. And we can keep doing this. And what we ended up doing is we reduced this channel to half its size. But the idea is that we have pooled all the necessary information from each region into the small number. So we have aggregated the important information, and now we have to process only this kind of small uh, low dimensional uh, region, low dimensional output. Okay. So now types of pooling. So now the question is, now we are pooling. So we are saying we are aggregating information from these 4 pixels to this pixel. The question is how exactly to aggregate this information. So one way to do it would be a linear effect, which would be a average pooling. So which would be if these 4 numbers are like this, we simply take their average value and put it here. Okay, so this is one way of pooling information. There are some nonlinear ways of doing this, which would be an example of one, which would be a max pooling. So max pooling basically looks at the region that we define and then looks at the highest value in that region and simply picks that value to represent this entire region. So this 75 goes and sits here, and all of these values are discarded. And this is actually the kind of pooling that we typically use in practice. So we locally select the most activated part of the region and use that part to represent that whole region. And this is how we get dimensionality reduction and then an opportunity to just further process this reduced representation of the image. Okay, so what hyperparameters did we have while implementing this pooling layer? Basically, we had two. We had size of the pooling kernel, which was 2 by 2, and then we had a stride. So how to go from one to the next. So we had the kernel here, and then we moved 2 pixels to have it here. So in the example that we saw, we had the size of the pooling kernel and the stride both set as 2, and this leads to halving of the input size. And for higher values of pooling kernel size and pooling stride, we get more dimensionality reduction. Okay, so that's about the pooling layer. right? So pooling layers aggregate information. So now we have both the main important subblocks of CNNs. So we have the image, we pass it through convolutional layers, we get a number of channels, we pass that through pooling layers, we reduce the dimensionality of the channels, and so again, as we said, we apply the pooling to each channel independently, right? And then to this representation, then we again apply some convolutional layer. So we get a different number of output channels. So always we can choose the number of output channels. So we get that, and then to that we can again apply pooling, and again convolution and pooling, and we can keep doing that. And this is how the whole CNN is constructed. Okay, and now the question is how to basically learn the values of the parameters of these convolutional layers, right? So we have these convolutional kernels here that define the transformation from image to output channels. There are no learnable parameters in the pooling layer, right? It's just if we decide to do max pooling, we just take the max value of the region and then put it here. So there's no learnable parameter there. But then again, we have convolutional layers, so which have their own convolutional kernels, and therefore, though the values of those kernels are learnable, and then we keep doing this. So the question is how to learn the values of the convolutional kernels, the biases, plus the weights and biases of any fully connected layers that we can have at the end. And the answer to this question is, in the case of supervised learning, is as you must have seen before in the neural network lecture, it's through this optimization. So we define a certain loss function by leveraging a certain annotated data set, and then we try to minimize this loss function by changing the values of the parameters theta. And this optimization is typically carried out by using some form of gradient descent, which means each parameter I is updated at step t plus time t plus 1 as whatever value it was at time t minus the partial derivative of the loss with respect to that parameter. And this is the learning rate parameter that you have. And this partial derivative is computed through backpropagation. So this is something that was discussed in the last lecture, right? So that works the same as MLPs. That works the same in CNNs as in MLPs. Okay. So finally, just to have one more concept here, now that we have looked at convolution and pooling, this concept is of receptive fields. So receptive field basically tells us if we look at a certain pixel at some output channel, okay, what is the region in the input image that is affecting the value of this pixel? So for example, in this case, it's the first convolutional layer, and this pixel is affected by, so if you're using a 3x3 convolutional kernel, then this pixel is affected by a 3x3 region in the input image. So the receptive field at this point is 3x3. Okay. Now let's consider what happens in the next layer. So now if we look at one pixel in the next layer, so this was a pooling layer, then this pixel is affected by, if we had used a 2x2 pooling kernel here, it is affected by a 2x2 region here, and we simply took the max value, for example, here. But each of these values is in turn affected by a 3x3 region around them, right? So the net receptive field for this guy is going to be 4x4, right? So we can see that as we proceed down these layers, the receptive field is going to increase steadily, right? And we will see why this is one property that makes CNNs especially well suited for image analysis. But for now, I just want to introduce this idea of what is the receptive field. Okay, so with this, now we have completed all the building blocks. We know what are convolutional layers. We know what is the convolution operator. We visually saw how it is implemented. We then had a discussion of the various hyperparameters that are involved while designing a convolutional layer, right? And then we went to pooling layers. We saw the different types of pooling available. And now we are ready to put together a simple image classification CNN. So what I will do is, again, I will take a pause at this point, and then we will continue from here in the next lecture or in the next part of the lecture.